Hey there, this is Eric Keller. I've been getting a lot of questions on my weekly ZBrush live stream, as well as from students, regarding some of the changes in ZBrush 26.1.1, specifically with the interface. So a lot of people will have custom interfaces that they built in older versions of ZBrush, and these interfaces might have icons for their favorite brush presets, or custom brush presets, or buttons for plugins, custom hotkeys, and so on. So when they load these into 26.1.1, things start breaking. So I wanted to create a short video that addresses some of the changes in 26.1.1 and how you can fix this so you can rebuild your interface and have your brush icons to your favorite custom brushes work correctly. Okay, so let's talk about the biggest change in ZBrush 2026.1.1 with Lightbox. If I open up Lightbox, we can see we now have two tabs. We have Maxon and we have User. The Maxon tab is the same as in previous versions of Lightbox. These are where you find all your preset projects, tools, brushes, textures, etc. So these can be loaded by simply going into the tab. For example, let's go to the project and I'll double click on the default project and that will load this project. And we have, here are my startup brushes. If I want to load a brush from Lightbox, I can go over here to brushes and say, let's go into flatten brushes, and I'll double click flatten line. And now this is loaded into the current session of ZBrush. If I close ZBrush and restart it, this brush will no longer be loaded since I loaded it from Lightbox. Okay, that's the same behavior as previous versions of ZBrush. Where are these files stored? These files are stored in C drive, program files, Maxon ZBrush 2026, Lightbox. Okay. Now the great thing about the new Lightbox setup is this user tab, because this user tab, you can store all of your own presets in a specified folder on your hard drive. So for example, I have my brush presets. I have some great brushes from Pablo, as well as some of my own presets and some other brushes that I've downloaded from various artists and that kind of thing. Stuff I use all the time. Where are these stored? These are stored in Documents, Keller, ZBrush Files, Lightbox, Brushes, right? So I've just created a directory on my C drive and put in all my custom brushes here just by copying and pasting them, and then they show up in Lightbox. Now, how do I set this directory? You set the directory by going into the Preferences and under Asset Directory. So this is a new menu. So we can open the directory, and this will open it up, just like I had before, in Explorer. We can change the location by clicking on this button and then choose a new folder, and that will change it for future versions of ZBrush, or we could reset to the default directory. The great thing about this is that as you update new versions of ZBrush, 2027 or whatever are going in the future, all you have to do is you don't have to move your files and copy your files and all the presets and all this other good stuff. You can just simply open the preferences and change the location of the directory to that same directory that you have on your hard drive, and then just go from there. Lightbox will load everything normally, etc., etc. It's also great if you're working in a place like either it's a company or a school or something like that. Everybody can have their own directory, and then they just set the directory, and then when they're working in ZBrush using, or if they have their own profile on the computer, the asset directory will be saved to that profile. So it saves a lot of time and trouble trying to sort out where the files are and that kind of thing. Now, the problem comes when you start to use custom interfaces. And that's what I want to talk about in this video. So many people like to have the brushes right here as part of the interface, so you don't have to load up Lightbox or load the brushes, etc. So you can just simply click on the icon right here in the interface and it loads up instantly. So typically the way you would do this is, let's go in here and let's just select some standard brushes. So for example, the Move brush or something like that. And I'm going to go into Preferences, and under Config, I'm going to enable Customize. So this is like a safety switch. When I turn this on, now I can move buttons around and rearrange the interface however I like and store it as a custom interface. And this is how you would place your brushes on the interface in this version of ZBrush. You would think that you would go in here and maybe grab a brush from here and push it on your interface. That's not how it works. You need to go to a very specific place to do this. You need to go into the Brush Palette, and use one of these icons right here. So for example, the clay brush, I'm going to hold Control and Alt and drag the clay brush and stick it down here. So there's my clay brush. Again, you don't want to use this icon because this icon opens up the brush library. These are the brush presets right here. If you don't see the brush preset that you want, you can simply just go in here, let's say maybe inflate, press I for inflate, select inflate, and now I can go into brush palette and use the small icon, Control Alt drag, stick it right here. So these are all standard brushes that load with ZBrush all the time. What about a custom brush? So I'll go into Lightbox under Users. I created a brush preset called Nubblies. So I'm going to double click this to load it into ZBrush. So now it's loaded into the ZBrush session. Control D, divide this a couple times just so we can see. This is what the brush looks like. It's just a brush I created really quickly with using a bunch of random settings and a custom outfit, mainly for this demonstration. I don't know if it's a very useful brush, but again, it's just to demonstrate how this works. So now the brush is loaded into the current session of ZBrush, and we also have it Nubblies right down here. And what I can do is Control Alt drag and place it down here. So there, now I have some custom brushes down here. And what I can do is go into Preferences, turn off Enable Customize. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to press Store Config. And what this does is this sets this interface as the default interface the next time I start up ZBrush. The next time I start up ZBrush, ideally, we'll see our brush presets down here. All right? So let's do that. Preferences, Store Config. See a little message down here, and that's good. If you want to go back to the standard UI at any time, you just press this button and it'll go back to the default UI, or if you want to restore your last used custom UI, you can click on this button. But remember, anytime you make a change to the interface, hit that Store Config button. That's also true if you change anything in the preferences here. If you change a preference, Store Config. Otherwise, you're going to lose that preference next time you start ZBrush. Okay, so press OK. Now that's stored. Now let's close ZBrush and restart it and see what happens. So I'm going to close ZBrush. So now I've reloaded ZBrush. Let's go into Projects, close the home page, double click on the default project. So we're in edit mode. And look, we have our clay brush, we have our inflate brush, but our Nubblies custom brush is not there. What's the problem? The problem is that we loaded it from Lightbox, from this user tab. So when you're clicking on any of these icons, think of this as being sort of like a link on a website. This is linking to a specific location. Here's the location right here. Users, Documents, Keller ZBrush files, Lightbox, Brush, Nubblies, just like I had before. And so it's essentially linking to this file right here, Nubblies, in this directory. We need to put this in the Z startup folder. That way, when ZBrush loads, it knows to load this brush preset and then stick it down here in my custom interface. Otherwise, it can't find it and it won't load that brush. The trick is, though, which Z startup folder. And this is, I think, was throwing a lot of users who were switching over to 2026 and discovering this for the first time. In older versions of ZBrush, what we do is we go into local C program files, version of ZBrush 2026, Z startup, and we would copy our brush presets here. We don't want to do this anymore because this folder is eventually going to go away. Where we want to put their brush presets now is not in Program Files, Maxon ZBrush 2026 Z Startup Brush Presets. What we want to do is we want to go to our custom folder that we set using the preferences. When we changed location and saved that, it created a directory structure in that location for us. And within that directory structure, there is a new Z Startup folder. So Documents, Keller ZBrush, that's obviously my own custom folder. We want to go here, Z Startup, Brush Presets. This is where we want to put our custom brush presets. So what I can do is I'll go into Keller ZBrush files, Lightbox, brushes. That's where I stored Nubblies. I'm going to right click over this and I'll choose copy. And I'll go into Keller ZBrush files, Z Startup, brush presets, and paste it right here. Okay, so just to reiterate, this is the Lightbox folder. So this is the same as going into Lightbox, users, brushes, this file right here in that location, going in there and copying it to my Z startup within my custom folder, brush presets. Sorry, I know I'm beating that dead horse, but it's really important that you put it there and not in the other Z startup folder on your C program files. Don't put anything in there. Stick it in your custom folder, Z startup brush presets, and there it is. Now I'm going to restart ZBrush, and what we should see is that custom brush should show up in our default ZBrush brush library. And then what we can do is put that onto our custom interface. So let's restart ZBrush. Okay, so I restarted ZBrush. I'm going to load up my default project here. Let's do like clay tube. So, okay, so that's working. If we go in the brush folder here, we can see there's nubblies. So click on this, and here is our custom brush, as wonderful as it is. So now what I want to do is I want to add this to my custom interface. Go into Preferences, Enable Customize, go into Brush Palette, find the small icon right here in the tray, Control-Alt, drag it down here. And now I'm going to go into Preferences, turn off Enable Customize, Store Config, and let's restart ZBrush and see if it worked. So I've restarted ZBrush yet again, and we can see there's nubblies right down there. So I'll load my default project, Control D, divide this a couple times. I'm going to do clay tubes. That's working just fine. And our custom brush is working just fine. So the whole point of this exercise is to make the point that if you're going to create a custom interface in ZBrush 2026, and that custom interface has brush presets on it, specifically custom brush presets, you want to make sure that the icon down here on your custom interface is pointing to the right place on your hard drive. Otherwise, it won't be able to load. And where is that right place? That right place is in your custom ZBrush folder, Z Startup brush presets, not under Lightbox. You can put all the brushes here, but they'll show up in Lightbox, but they won't show up in the interface, even if you load it from Lightbox and then drag it on here. Got to be in Z Startup. Let's talk a little bit about custom hotkeys and interfaces going from previous versions of ZBrush into 2026.1.1. So I'm in ZBrush 2025.2. A quick review of how to set up a hotkey. What you want to do is press Control and Alt at the same time and click on a button. Notice that I have not turned on the Enable Customize. I'm just doing with this regular interface. So I'm going to hold Control and Alt and click on my inflate brush icon down here. Make sure that we want to see this message up here at the top where it says press any key combination, etc. And now I'm going to press Shift I. So now if I hover over the button, see how it says inflate Shift I. So let's say I'm on the clay brush, and I'm working in ZBrush. I'm going to press Shift I. Now I'm on the inflate brush. So that's what I want. So let's say I've saved a whole bunch of hotkeys all over the place for all my favorite brushes. I want to go into Preferences and go into Hotkeys. And the easiest way to do this, if I store this, this is going to store it as ZBrush default hotkeys for 2025.2. I can also choose to save it, and I can save it as a file. So I'm going to call this Keller Hotkeys. I'll just save over this file. So notice that I'm in 2025.2, so that means that it's going to save the public documents, these Z Data 2025 Z Startup. The Z Data folders are going to go away in future versions of ZBrush. So I'm going to store this, and then I'm going to copy it over into the correct directory for 2026. So I'll just save this and just overwrite it, and we can do the same thing for this interface. If we want to store a custom interface, you don't want to go into the interface submenu or the custom UI menu. This is for creating custom menus. A little bit confusing. You want to go into config. So this is clearly a custom interface which I created, and I'm going to choose Preferences, Save UI. And again, this is going to save it in a ZBrush 2025 Z Startup, and I'll call this ZBrush 2025 custom interface, and I'll just overwrite this file. Okay. Now let's deal with 2026. I think the easiest way to do this is to simply copy those files over into our Z Startup folders for 2026 within that documents folder. So in other words, I'm going to go into where I stored that hotkey file. So that's ZBrush data 2025 Z Startup hotkeys. I'll just copy this. It's just a text file, not that special. I'm going to go into Documents, Keller ZBrush files. Again, that's my custom folder. You can call it whatever you want, and you can actually put it anywhere you want on your computer. I chose to put it on my Documents folder on my C drive. So I'm going to go to Keller ZBrush files, Z Startup, double click in hotkeys. I already have it in here, but I'm just going to paste this over and just replace it. So there we go. Just replace those hotkeys. There we go. And then the next thing I'm going to do is let's go to that custom UI file. So that's going to be this one right here. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to go into Keller ZBrush files, Z Startup. You do user interface layouts. I'm going to paste it in here. So let's close ZBrush 2025, and we'll go into ZBrush 2026. So now I'm in ZBrush 2026.1.1. You can tell because I have my tabs under my Lightbox. And so what I'm going to do is go into Preferences. Let's get that hotkeys file. So I'll go to Hotkeys, and I'm going to choose Load. And it's going to go into Keller ZBrush files, Z Startup hotkeys. There's my hotkeys. I'll select this. If I hover over to this, notice it says Shift-I for my inflate brush. So that's the hotkey that I set in 2025. And this is 2026.1.1. Now I'll press Shift-I, my inflate brush, and everybody's happy. You could always go into Preferences, under Hotkeys, and choose Store. Now this will be the startup. So next time I load ZBrush 2026, those are my hotkeys. Always a good idea to hit that Store Config button just for good luck. Okay, now let's talk about UI. You can see I have my custom UI here. I want to load that other custom UI from 2025. So I'm going to choose Load UI. And let's go to Z Startup. I believe I put it under User Interface Layout. So I'm going to load this, choose Open, and there we go. So keep in mind, if you're loading an older ZBrush interface from an older version of ZBrush, like 2025 or whatever, and if that interface has icons for custom brush presets or buttons from Z plugins that are not loaded in 2026, they're not going to work, or they won't show up. So that part's going to be broken. So chances are you'll have to reconstruct that. If you have icons, like in this custom interface, I have icons that are pointing to standard ZBrush presets, like the clay, standard, move, and inflate brushes. And then the buttons also I have pointing to Decimation Master, which is part of 2026, a Z plugin that's already loaded in 2026. So those buttons load and they work just fine. But if you have custom plugins, custom brush presets, you're going to have to reconstruct that part of the interface. But the good news is that, you save the interface, and then going forward in future versions of ZBrush, it should be less work when loading custom interfaces. Okay, so I hope this video has been helpful in solving some of the issues you may have experienced in migrating to ZBrush 26.1.1. It's a big change, lots of more changes coming in the future, but I think they're all for the better. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to my channel, and I'll have many more videos coming in the future. Thanks a lot.